Over on my homepage, I can see a feed of all of the posts published within the subreddits that I follow. On the right-hand side, I can also see a list of subreddits that I haven't yet joined. If I would like, I could even search in my search bar here for any relevant subreddits within my platform. Or if I'm feeling creative, I could choose to create a new post. And not only will I be able to choose which subreddit this post should be published within, but I can also choose if I'd like this to be a text-based or an image-based post. I can then choose to upvote this post, or even go ahead and leave a comment if I would like, and it will populate my comment field below. Hello, my name is Lachlan Kirkwood, and today I'll be teaching you how to build a Reddit clone entirely out of no code using Bubble. I've personally been using Bubble over the past 3 years, and it's by far my favorite no-code tool by a mile. I love that it gives you the ability to create your own custom database. It gives you full control over your own design interface. It allows you to easily stitch everything together using easy to follow workflows. And you can also integrate with third-party tools and services. What I love the most about the product is that it includes everything you need within one single tool. For those of you who don't know me, I'd previously worked with the Bubble team in 2020 to write their How to Build blog series. This series essentially took a list of the top products out there on the market, like Airbnb, Uber, and Instagram, and just wrote the step-by-step instructions that explained how you could rebuild those products using Bubble's tool. If you're anything like me though, you might find using a video tutorial more helpful to follow, which is where I am now a couple years later. I've created my own video series to explain things in as much detail as possible. And of course, I would just like to point out that this series has no affiliation with Bubble at all. It's something that I'm doing in my own time. Throughout today's tutorial, we're going to be building our own community-based platform like Reddit. I've had a ton of requests to add this one onto my list, so I'm excited to finally get around to building it. This product will include features like having the ability to register user accounts. We're also going to create a homepage feed to display a list of relevant Reddit posts. We'll be building a way for users to create and manage their own subreddits. We'll of course create a way for users to publish new posts, and then have community members engage with those posts through things like upvotes and comments. And then towards the end of the tutorial, we'll be building out a dynamic user profile page, as well as a peer-to-peer chat experience. There's plenty I want to cover throughout this tutorial, so let's grab our Bubble editor and dive right into it. The very first feature I wanted to focus on in our build today isn't actually a core user-facing feature. Instead, I wanted to take the time to build out the necessary infrastructure in our database, which, while that might sound completely unsexy, I want to make sure that we take the time to correctly set up the infrastructure we need to ensure the longevity of our platform. And of course, we also need to know how we're actually going to set up all of the different data types and fields, which will eventually power all of the features that our users interact with on our platform. And now throughout today's tutorial, I'm just going to be keeping tabs in a Notion doc here. And as you'll see, I have all of my data types and fields listed out. What I love about Notion is that you can actually just check off items once you added them into your Bubble editor. So it just helps me keep a better track of my build. And now, as I mentioned, I have a list of all of my database structure, as well as a list of all of the features that I want to cover throughout today's tutorial. But before we jump into Bubble and start building out the different data types, I just want to cover what those data types are going to be and why I'm adding them into the build. And so when it comes to structuring your database, I get asked a lot how I approach the whole situation. And in my opinion, I find that when it comes to data types, if something needs to be created within your application, it needs to be a data type. So let's say if someone is creating an account, that's going to be a data type, which is our user. If someone's going to create a subreddit, which is of course a community, that's going to be a separate data type. Then if someone wants to create a post, a comment, a chat, or even a message, these are all going to be separate data types. And then within each data type, you're going to have a list of data fields. And that's all of the information you would like to store under each particular overarching data type. And if I was to jump over into my bubble editor and open up my data tab here, the first thing you'll notice is that by default, there is a user data type that already exists. And within this field, it just stores the user's email and a password. You just won't be able to see the password in plain text for privacy reasons. But the reason why Bubble automatically provides this data type is because, of course, if someone wants to use your application, they're more than likely going to need to register an account, which of course will need an email and a password in order to store data about a user. One thing I would just like to point out while we're here is that you might have seen this text, which just indicates that there is currently a privacy rule being applied to our user data type. If we were to click into that and just review what this rule highlights, it just mentions that users are only able to see the data that they personally create themselves within our platform. So if a user was to create an account, they can view their own account data. If they were to create a post, they could view their own post. But that means that if someone else was to create a post, this user who did not create a post would not be able to see that. And for a community platform like Reddit, that's actually not the experience we want. We want everyone to be able to engage and interact with each other's content that they publish. So what we're going to do is just take the time to quickly remove this privacy rule here. And then we're going to jump back over to our data types tab. And you'll now see that our user data type is publicly visible. If you're adding in new data types, you'll just need to make sure that this box is not checked here, or else it's going to apply the same privacy rule that we have just deleted. But if we jump back into our Notion doc now, we can start reviewing all of the different data types we have and then add those into our Bubble database. So when it comes to creating the database, you'll need to add in all of your data types first and then build out these separate data fields, just because some data fields will link out to different data types, which I'll explain how that works in a moment. But if we're adding in our data types, we have our user data type already in Bubble. The next one I want to add in is the subreddit data type. So I'm just going to add this in. I'll choose to create that. And then back in Notion, I can see that there is the post data type. So every single time someone wants to create a Reddit post, we're going to need to create a new thing. So I'm going to add that into our database. And then you may have noticed before, but I have another data type here called post content. And now the reason why I've created a separate data type from our post is because I just want to split the data fields here into two. So every time we'd like to load a data type within our Bubble editor, it's going to load all of the data fields that sit within it. So let's say you've got a homepage feed and you want to load a list of 10 posts. It's going to load those 10 posts as well as all of the data fields that sit within it. And if you're starting to store large files like long form text or even images, it can quickly slow down your application because of course it needs to load more significant data at once. And so this is the benefit of splitting this into two separate data types. And so on our post data type here, I have a list of all of the more lightweight data fields. And then I have a separate data type here which stores the actual content of each post. So that is the text and the images, which of course will often be a larger file size. And then we're going to link that back to the original post data type, just so whenever we open a post, we can reference the content within it. And so if I jump into Notion, I'm going to create another data type called post content. And we'll be building out all of the data fields within this in a moment. But if I just jump back into Notion, I can see there's 3 more data types I'll need to add. There is my comment. So if someone wants to comment on a post, we're going to need to create a new entry in our database. So I'm going to add that. back in Notion, I can see the last two data types are our chat and our message. So if two users want to create a chat between them, we're going to need to create that within our database. And then if users would like to exchange messages within a chat, every single time they send a message, we're going to have to create a new message in our database. And so because we're creating something, that is going to be a data type. So we're going to add in our message data type. We will create that. And now that we've finished adding in all of our data types, we can start to build out all of the data fields that sit within them. So data fields are essentially all of the information you'd like to store for every single entry within your database. So for every single user, I'd obviously like to store a username, a bio, a profile photo, and so on. And so now we're just going to take the time to add those within our Bubble database here. So I'm going to head over to our user data type, and I'm just going to start by adding in a data field called username. So when a user creates an account, we're going to need to be able to identify them by a unique username. And for this field type here, I want this to just be a text data field, just because the username is going to be a string of text characters. I will create that. And then while we're here, our bio is also going to be another text field. That one's nice and simple. And then from here, I'd like to store a profile photo for every user. So I'm going to call this profile photo. And this field type will be an image. I will create that. Then after we've added in our profile photo, I'd also like to store a banner photo for a user. So this is like their cover photo for a profile. This field type is also going to be another image. Then I would like to identify a list of all of the followers this user has. And now when it comes to this data field, I'm going to want to set this as a list of users. So every single time someone wants to follow a user on our platform, I'm going to want to add them to a total list of users who are all of the people that follow them. So I'm going to set this field type to be a user, but I'm going to tick this box here, which just allows me to save this as a list with multiple entries. So this now allows me to save it as a list of users. I will create that. And then after our followers data field, I'd like to add in another called following. So this will allow me to identify who this particular user follows on our platform, not who they are being followed by. And once again, this field type is going to be a list of users. So I'll select for this to be a user and tick that this should be a list. And then finally, I have one last data field I would like to add under our user data type, and that is a list of all of the subreddits that they have joined. So I'm going to create a new field. I'm going to call this joined subreddits, and I would like this to be yet again another list. Only this time I want it to be a list of subreddits. And this is where we can start to link out our data fields to different data types, which allows you to create a truly relational database. So I'm going to reference this field type to be a list of subreddits. So I'm going to choose this to be a subreddit and tick that this is a list, which means that if at any point in time I would like to reference any information from any subreddit within this list, I can easily pull from any of the data fields we're about to add underneath our subreddit data type. I'm going to create this for now though, and that's all of the fields we'll need to add within our user data type. So let's jump back into my Notion doc here. I'm going to highlight all of these data fields. I'm going to tick off that we've finished adding those in, and now we can move along to the subreddit data fields. So for every subreddit that's created within our database, we're going to need to yet again store a name, a photo, a banner photo, as well as some additional information. So let's jump into our Bubble editor and open up our subreddit data type. And the first field, as I mentioned, is going to be the name of the subreddit. And similar to the data field of our user's name, this is just going to be a text field type there. And then after that data field, I'm going to add one for the featured photo of this subreddit. So this is just like the profile photo of this community. And this field type is going to be an image. Then I also want to store a banner photo for this community. and this is going to be another image field. And then I'm going to want to add another field, and this is going to be called not safe for work. So this will allow the creator of a subreddit to just identify if the content within this is for those users who are 18 years or over. And the way I can identify if this is a not safe for work subreddit or not is by selecting from the yes/no field type. So it either is going to be a not safe for work subreddit, meaning it is for users over 18 plus, or it's not a not safe for work subreddit, meaning it's just a general subreddit for everyone. And then I'm going to choose to create this data field, but there's one thing I would like to update here, and that is the default value of this field. So for every single subreddit that's created, I would like to set the default value of the not safe for work status to be no, which actually means that it is safe for work. And the reason I'm doing that, which you'll see in a moment, is when we actually create a subreddit, the admin of that will have the ability to check a box to identify if it is not safe for work. And if they don't check that box, it's just going to leave the default value at no. And then the final data field I'll need to add within my subreddit is just a list of moderators who will have control over the content within it. And this field type is going to be a list of users. So for this field type, I will select it's a user and tick that this is a list with multiple entries. I'm going to jump back in my Notion doc now and tick off all of these data fields there. And then we can move along to our post data type. So if I jump over into my bubble editor, I'll open up our post data type here. And the very first field I'm going to need to add is the title of the post, which is just a standard text field. It's nice and easy. And then I would also like to identify the subreddit that this post has been published within. So that's what community it belongs to. And so I'm going to need to link this back to an original subreddit, which when we build out the workflows for that later on, I'll show you how that's possible. But for now, I'm just going to create a field called original subreddit. For short, I'm just going to call it OG subreddit. And this is going to link back to an individual subreddit. So we're going to scroll on down to the subreddit data type. And I won't be ticking this box here because I only want one post to link to one subreddit. Of course, if you'd like one post to link to multiple subreddits, you could definitely tick this box here. But for the sake of our MVP, I'm just going to keep things nice and simple today. I will create that. And then the very last fields I'd like to add onto our post data type is just a list of all of the users who have upvoted and downvoted this post. So I'm going to create a new field and I'll be calling this upvotes. And this field type is going to be a list of users, because every single time someone upvotes a post, I'm going to add them to that total list. And then later on, we can perform a calculation on how many people are actually in that list. So if there's 1,000 people in that list, we can easily count that this post has 1,000 upvotes. So I'm going to set the field type here to be a user, and I'm going to select that this is a list with multiple entries. I will create that. And then we're going to need to do the exact same thing for our downvotes. So I'm going to create a new data field. This field type is going to be a user, and I'll be selecting that this is a list with multiple entries. That's all I'll need to add for our post data type. Let's jump back into Notion, and I'm going to tick off those fields there. If I would now like to build out the data fields under my post content, I'm going to jump back into Bubble, open up my post content data type, and the first field I'd like to register here is going to be called post text. So if someone creates a text-based post, I'm going to want to store the value of that within this field. And this is just going to be a simple text field. The second data field is going to be called post image. So if someone wants to publish an image-based post, it's just going to store the value of an image. And then the very last data field I'd like to add in is just the original post that this post content belongs to. So every time we create a post, we're also going to need to create a separate post content data entry. And then I'd like to link this post content back to the original post it belongs to. So that way, when I show the information of a post, I can easily link the full post content itself. So I'm going to create a new field, and I'm going to call this original post, and this field type will just be a single post because one post content is going to link to one particular post. I will create that, and then I can jump back into Notion and check off that we've finished building out those data fields, and we're slowly making our way through the list. There's only 3 more data types to go. The next is our comment data type. So every single time someone creates a comment, we're going to want to obviously store the value of the message within the content. So I'm going to create a new field here, and I'll be calling this field content. So this is the content of the comment. This is just going to be a text-based field. And then because comments will be published on posts, I just need to link each comment back to an individual post. So that way, when we view the full details of a post on a page, I can display a list of all of the comments that belong to that post as well. So I'm going to need to create a new field here, and I'm going to call this original post, and I'm going to be linking this back to our post data type. So I'm going to scroll on down and choose to link this to a post. I will create that, and that's all of the data fields we'll need under our comment data type. So I'm going to jump back into Notion. The next one is going to be our chat data type. This one's actually quite simple. The reason why there's only one data field here is because we have a separate data type called messages. So a chat is just like a container for 2 users. And then within that, we're going to store all of the messages within that chat. And of course, I'll be explaining that in full detail when we get to that step in our build. But under our chat data type here, I'm going to add a new field, and I'm going to call this chat users. And this is going to be a list of users. So the field type will be a user, and I will tick that that is a list with multiple entries. It's as simple as that. I can tick that off in my Notion doc, and now we can start building out the final data fields here. So if I jump back into Bubble, we're going to open up our message data type. And for every single message that's created, I'm going to need to store the text of the message as well as the chat that this message should be published within. So I'm going to create a new field, and this is going to be called the content of a message. This is going to be a text-based field. And then finally, the very last field is just going to be called original chat, just so I can link and display this message back to a chat. And this, of course, is going to be a chat field type, and I'm going to create that. And that is the very last data field I would like to add in. As you can see, it's never been easier to create your own custom database entirely out of no code using Bubble's tool. As I mentioned, I know it can sometimes be a little unsexy to have to plan out the build of your database, but it's definitely essential if you want to get the most out of your build. After taking the time to structure our database, we can move along to the list of features that I have set out for us today here. And what you'll see is the first feature that I'd like to build is a registration page that allows users to actually sign up for our platform. Now this is a fairly straightforward process, so I'm just going to jump on over into my Bubble editor, and I'll start walking you through the process itself. Over in my Bubble editor, I have a brand new application here, and the first thing I'm going to want to do is create a new page within it, which will be used as our user registration page. So I'm going to head to the top left-hand drop down here and choose to open up our page menu, and I'll be adding a new page into our application. I'll be calling this page a register, and I'll choose to create that. And now once we've created this page, we can start adding in the elements and input fields that will actually make our registration process functional. And so the first element I'm going to want to add if we're replicating the real world Reddit product is just an image on the left hand side of my page here. So I'm going to head to our visual elements. I'm going to choose to add in an image, and I'm just going to drag out a nice vertical rectangle there. And now I've taken the time to head to Reddit itself and save the image that they feature on their own registration page. So I'm just going to add that in as a static image. But if you'd also like to use the same image, I'd recommend heading to the Reddit website, selecting to register an account, and just right-clicking and saving the image they display. I'm just going to upload this image from my files. And once I've uploaded that image, I can start to add in any additional elements I would like on my page before I add in the input fields where users can add in their information like their email address, their password, and the username they'd like to use. And the first of those elements will just be a heading. So I'm going to once again head to my visual elements tree here. I will then add in a text element. I'm going to just drag this out on my page, and this will display the words sign up. I'm also going to update the style of this to just be the default H2 heading style that Bubble uses. And this will just allow me to emphasize this text a little more. I'm also then just going to add in another text element below this. And if you've registered an account on Reddit's real website in the past, you'll see that they've just got a quick little summary of text that just highlights their terms and conditions. And so within this text element here, I'm just going to choose to paste in that text. If you want to add in the exact same message, I just recommend pausing the tutorial and just copying that text in that's displayed within this field here. I'll just reduce the height of that text element itself, because below this, now what I'd like to do is add in the input fields where users can actually store the information we'll be registering with their account. And the first field I'd like to register is the email of a user. So we're going to scroll on down in our left-hand menu here to our input forms section. And we're going to choose to just add in a standard input field. I'm going to drag this out here, and I'll be updating the name of this input field to be called input email. And the reason I take the time to name my input fields is because when we actually create the workflow to register an account, I can easily identify which data from the field on our page should match the data field within our database for our users. But while we're also here, I'm going to update the placeholder text that's displayed within this field before a user types in it to just display the word email, so that way the end user themselves knows that they need to add in an email here. And the very last change I'll need to make to this field is update the type of content format that's stored within this entry itself. So at the moment, it currently allows me to identify the value of this field to be stored as a text option, whereas what I'm going to want to do is actually store this as an email. And what this will do is allow Bubble to automatically identify if the structure of the input within this field, whether or not it's a valid email address or not. And I'll be showing you how that functions within a demo in a moment. Might also just move this input field down a tad, and then I'm going to want to copy this field. I'll drag the copied version down, and within this field here, I'd like to allow the user to add in a password for their account. So I'm going to start by updating the name of this input to be called input password. And of course, I'll then update the placeholder text to also display the word password, so that way they know to add their password into that field. And then, of course, after we've added in the placeholder text, we'll just need to update the content format here to not be an email, but instead be a password. And what that's going to do is allow Bubble to actually hide the characters that are added within this field. And again, I'll be showing you that in a demo in a moment. But from here, there's one very last field I'd like to add in. So I'm going to make one more copy of my input field. I'm going to drag this down. And within this input field, I'd like a user to register the username they'll be using in our Reddit platform. So I'm going to be updating the name of this input field to be called username. I'll also update the placeholder text to display the word username again. And for the content format, I would just like this to be a standard text type, which is a nice and simple option. And then finally, the last element I'd like to add below our input fields is just a button that when clicked will trigger our workflow, allowing a user to register an account. So I'm going to scroll on up to our visual elements here. I'm going to choose to add in a button element, and I will drag this button out on our page so it's the same length as the input fields above it there. If I'd really like, I could click on my input field and I can see that the width is 344 pixels. So I could just make sure that the width of our button is also 344 pixels. And then I will just make sure it's in line with the fields above it there. And while we're here, I'm going to edit the text that's displayed within this button. And I will have this display the word sign up. And then I'd also like to edit the style of this button so it matches the same style as the real world Reddit product. So I'm going to choose to edit the style of our primary button here. And I'm going to update the color of this button to be the same blue color code that Reddit uses. If you'd like that, it's 0079D3. And while I'm also here, I'm just going to update the roundness of this button to be 20, just so, which you'll see in a moment, the edges are nice and curved like the real world Reddit product. And just like that, you can see we've added in all of the necessary input fields to register a user's account. But before we actually build out the workflow to sign this user up in our platform, there's one last small feature I'd like to run you through. And that is the process of how you can ensure that usernames remain unique within your platform. So let's say a user was to register an account with a specific handle, and then at a later point in time, another user would like to register an account using the same handle that already exists in our platform. We obviously won't want a user to create another account with the same username to one that already exists. And the way we can stop this from occurring is by adding some alert text and also a condition onto our button that recognizes if the value of this input field here matches the exact same value as any other username within our database. And so in order to create that, the first thing we're going to do is grab a text element. I'm going to drag this out beside our button here. And for this text, I'd like to display the words username taken. And I would also like to update the style of this text to be a red color. So I'm going to just remove the style here so I can create my own custom style. And for the font color, I'm just going to choose to add in a red color. If I'd like, I could make this text a little bit bigger. I'll make it font size 20, and I'll also bold that text there, just so it looks like a proper alert message there. And now as it stands on our page, this text is currently being displayed at all times. Whereas I only want it to be displayed if a user has added in a username for their account they'd like to create that already exists within our database. So what I'm going to need to do is create a condition onto this text element that only allows it to be displayed under certain circumstances. And so the first thing we're going to need to do is unselect that this element is visible on page load, meaning that it should not be visible by default. And instead, I'm going to need to create a condition here that will identify when it can be displayed. And within this condition, I'm going to want to perform a search through my database for all of the users where any of their usernames equals the same value as the input username field on our page. And if there is an instance where the value of the input field here matches someone's existing username, I want this text to be displayed. So when the count of that instance is greater than 0, meaning that at least one account in our database exists with the existing username, what I'd like to do is make this element visible and tick that that should be true. So our text would now be displayed. And while I've displayed an error message to the user here, what I'd also like to do is restrict the functionality of this button element, just making sure that a user can't click to register an account if they haven't selected a unique username. And so I'm going to need to create a similar condition onto our button here. And the fastest way to do that is by right-clicking on this existing text element. And I'm going to choose to copy the conditional formatting. So that's the condition that I've just added. I'm then going to right-click on our sign up button here and choose to paste the conditional formatting. And what you'll now see is that the condition has been copied across, as well as the behavior. I obviously want this button to be visible at all times, so I'm just going to remove the behavior I've added onto that condition. But what I want to select is the option to make this element not clickable, and I want that to be true, so I'm going to be ticking that field. So now when a user's username is not unique, this button here will not be clickable. So they won't be able to click that and trigger our workflow to register an account. Which, speaking of which, now that we've added in all of the elements onto our page, we can choose to create a new workflow every single time our sign up button is clicked here. And within this, we'll be registering a user's new account in our database. So for the first step of this workflow, we're going to head to the account option here, and we'll choose to sign the user up. And now within this, we're just going to need to match the value of the input fields with the values we'll need to store in our database. So for the user's email, we'll want this to be the same value as the input email on our page. Then for our password, we want this to be the value of our input password. And what I love about Bubble is that when you're creating a new user's account, it'll also allow you to change any other data fields you'd like under the user data type. So in this case, I just like to update the user's username by default. So I'm going to select to add another field here, and this will be the username. And of course, I'd like this to equal the same value as the input username on our page. And just like that, that is how simple it is to register a user's account. One thing I would just like to do though is create another event within our workflow here, because as it stands, a user would come to our registration page, they'd add in all their details and choose to sign up an account. And although that workflow would successfully run, the user's just going to remain on this page. Whereas what I'd like to do is redirect them through to a settings page within our application, which just allows them to update any additional information they'd like to store within their account. And so before I add that step into our workflow, I'm going to need to create that page. So I'll head to our page drop-down menu, choose to add a new page. I'll just be calling this a settings page, and I will create that. And now I won't need to make any changes to this page at the moment, so I'm just going to leave that blank. What I will just need to do though is head back over to my registration page here, open up my workflow tab, choose the workflow we had previously created, and just select to add in an additional step here. And the event I would like to take place is a navigation action, and I'll be sending the user through to another page. So I'll be selecting the go to page option, and the destination page will be the settings page that we've just created. And I won't need to send any data through to that page just yet, although I'll be explaining under what circumstances we will need to do that later on in our tutorial. But for now, that's everything I'd like to explain within our user registration page here. Let's jump on over into our Bubble development environment, and we can now take a quick preview as to what this whole experience looks like. Over in my Bubble preview here, I'm going to start by adding in an email address for my account. You'll see when I click away, Bubble has validated that that email address structure is correct. And then if I was to add in a password, you'll see that those characters are hidden. And of course, after that, I can add in my username. I'm just going to call this test user. And because this is the first account that I'm creating within my database, the error message shouldn't show because this username is unique at the time, which means I'll then be able to click my sign up button here. That workflow will process. It will not only register an account within our database, but you'll see in our URL here, it's also now redirected me through to our settings page. Back in my Notion checklist, I'm going to tick off that I've finished building out the registration feature within our product today. And throughout that, I've just taken the time to explain how you can allow users to only register unique usernames, as well as how you can also create a redirect event once the workflow had initially ran. The next core feature that I want to focus on throughout our build is actually taking the time to build out the homepage itself within our Reddit product. And now this is probably the most common user-facing feature you're familiar with when you use Reddit in real life. And there's actually plenty that we'll need to add onto this page in order to make it functional. So let's just jump over into our Bubble editor, and I can start walking you through the process of how we can create the elements on the page and the workflows that will stitch everything together. Over in my Bubble editor here, we're going to need to create a brand new page within our application. So we're going to head to the page drop-down menu here and select to add a brand new page. And we'll be calling this the home page. I'll choose to create this. And the first thing I'm going to want to do on this page is just a little personal preference that I like when I'm adding lots of elements onto a page. And that is that I'm just going to select the overall page here and update the background color to be a light shade of gray for the time being. And the reason I do that is because it just allows me to see where my canvas ends within my Bubble editor. So that way I can get a good idea as to where the elements are on the page as I place them in. And now the very first element I will be adding is just a Reddit logo in the top left-hand corner of our page. So in order to add in a static image, I'm going to head to our visual elements, select to add in an image element. I'm just going to drag this out here. Now on my local device, I have an image of a Reddit logo. If you'd like to add your own, I'd recommend just Google searching for the Reddit logo itself. I'm just going to choose to upload mine here. And once I've uploaded the logo, I might actually make this a tad bit bigger and it will scale accordingly. And then beside our logo in the top menu here, I'm just going to add in a search bar. And now we won't be building out any workflows to actually power that now, although I will be covering how we can create a custom search experience in a later module. But in order to create our own custom search experience, I'm going to scroll on down to our containers menu here. And now if you've used Bubble in the past, you might be familiar under the input forms with the search box itself. And if you have used the search box element in the past, you'll know that it will allow you to search through all of the data entries within your database. But instead of adding in a search field, I'm actually going to add in just a regular input field, just because I'm going to display a group that pops up below our custom search experience that will store a repeating group to allow us to display a list of all the options based on a user search query. And although the search box itself will often display a list of results, it will only display the text entry for those results. Whereas in my search box today, I'm going to want to search through a list of subreddits, and I'd like to not only display the name of those subreddits, or the avatar or the profile photo that's actually stored for that subreddit. So that way users can easily differentiate between two different subreddits with a similar name. And so in order to add in my own custom experience, I'd mentioned that I was going to add in a container before. Sorry, I meant to say I'm adding in an input field here. So I'm going to choose under our input forms, just add in a single input field. I'm going to drag this in across our page. And I will have the text here display the word search, subreddit, ... And you'll see that the name of that input field will update accordingly. If I would like, I could just move that over to the left-hand side so it's a little bit closer to our logo. And then I might also just expand the width of that out a little bit further. And that's all we'll need to add for our input field here at the moment. As I mentioned, I'll be explaining how we can build out a custom search experience in a later module. But for now, what I'd like to do is add in a way for users to actually create posts from our homepage. So if you've ever used Reddit before, you'll know that there is a bit of a button below the search bar. And when a user clicks that, it redirects them through to a page where they can start posting a Reddit post within a subreddit. And this is something that we can easily create. And so in order to do that, I'm going to start by adding in a group element into our page here. And I'm just going to drag this out to be roughly the same length as our logo and our search bar there. And because this group has the default group style, I'm just going to need to update the configurations just so we can change the color and the border and everything for this group. So we're going to choose to remove the style here. We will then update the background style to be a flat color, and I'll be keeping this as the white color. And then for the roundness, I'm going to update this to be 5. And so that way you'll actually just see that the borders around this group are nice and curved. And then within this group, I can start adding in the elements which when clicked will allow us to redirect a user through to a page where they can actually create a Reddit post. The first element I'd like to add in though is just the profile photo of this particular user. And in order to do that, I'm going to scroll on up to our visual elements. I'm going to choose to add in just an image element here. And for this image, I'm just going to update the dimensions of this to be 50 pixels wide and 50 pixels high. And while we're here, I'm also going to update the roundness of this to be 100. So that way it is a perfect circle. And if I'd like to see where this image lies within my white group here, I can just update the border to be a solid border for now. And now you'll see where that image actually sits within the group. Of course, when you preview your application or when you publish it into the live environment, you can always remove that border at any time. But while we're here, I'm also going to want to update the value of the picture that's actually being displayed. And so when a user registers an account within our Reddit platform, we'd only ask for them to store a username, an email, and a password. We hadn't actually required them to add in a profile photo. And so what I'm going to need to do is upload a default profile photo that every single account will have once it's created, and then also create a way to dynamically display a custom profile photo if that particular user has in fact updated their profile photo image. And so I'm going to start by adding in the default profile photo. So I'm going to upload a static image here, and I just have an image within my local drive here, which is the default Reddit avatar. I'm going to choose to open that, and once it's uploaded, you'll see that it has filled in the value of our image element. And so by default, every single user is going to have this as their profile photo. But of course, I want to create a condition on this element that recognizes if that user has in fact updated their profile photo. And if they have, I would like to display that custom image. So under our condition tab here, I'm going to define a new condition, and I'm going to recognize when the current user, so that's the person who's logged in viewing their homepage, when their profile photo, when it is not empty, meaning it has a custom value stored in it, I'm going to update the image source here, and I'll be adding in a dynamic image. And for this, I would like to display the current user's profile photo, because of course, if they have uploaded a profile photo and it's not empty, we can now choose to display that value. And while we're here, I'm also just going to choose to process this with Imgix, just because we can select the option to resize the dimensions of that custom image by cropping it, which just means it's going to expand the dimensions of that image so it fits within our circle nicely. I can then choose to close that. And then I'm also just going to move our profile photo a little to the left, and also just make sure it's roughly in the center of my group here. And then beside this, I'm going to add another group within my existing group here. And if you haven't used Bubble before, or you're not familiar with groups, the beauty of these is that once you add an element into a group, if I was to move the group, you'll see everything within that moves with it accordingly. So all of those elements are grouped nicely within our parent group here. I'm just going to move that element back for now. But what I'm going to do is choose to add in another group within my existing group, as I mentioned. And this is going to act like a custom search bar. And the reason I'm using a group instead of an input field like our existing custom search bar is because groups are quite easy to trigger workflows whenever they're clicked, which is exactly what we want to create for our Reddit clone here. So whenever someone clicks that they want to create a post, I want to redirect them through to a separate page where they can then choose to create the text or image within that post itself. And so in order to do that, I'm going to add in a group element here. I'm going to drag this across, and I will update the appearance of this group to have a darker gray background color. So I'm going to head to the style of this group, choose to remove the existing style. I will update the background style to be a flat color, and then I'm just going to choose to add in a darker gray color. It's probably a bit too dark. There we go. And I would also like the roundness of the borders in this group to be 5. And while I'm here, I'm also going to make the height of this group 50 pixels, so that way it matches the same height as our profile photo element beside it there. And now within this group, I'm just going to add in one last element, which is a text element. I'm going to drag that out, and I will have this text element display the words "create a post." And while I'm here, I'm just going to remove the style of this text, just because I want to lighten the shade of gray that's displayed for this text color. I can then just move that so it's roughly in the center of my group there. And what you'll see is that this now looks like a button or an input field where a user can click in to create a post. But when we're replicating the real world Reddit product, of course, when someone clicks on this, it actually acts as a button, not an input field. And when that button is clicked, it redirects them through to a page where they can actually submit a Reddit post. But while we're working on this main group here, there's two last things I would like to add in, and that is just a couple of different icons. So if you were viewing the real world Reddit homepage, you'll see that there's almost input field lookalike. And then beside that, there's two icons, one of an image and one of a link. And that is actually something we can easily replicate by adding in an icon here. So under our visual elements, I'm going to select to add in an icon. I'm going to drag this out. And for our icon here, I'm just going to type in the word picture and just choose this picture icon. I'll also remove the style of this because I would like to update this to be a custom gray color. And then from here, I'm just going to copy this icon, drag this across, and I want this icon to be a link. So it looks like you can add a link to a post. I'm happy with that. And then while I'm here, we're just going to do a bit of housekeeping. I'm just going to drag the width of that group out so it matches the same length as the input field above it. If I wanted, I could right click on my icon here and choose to center that vertically so it sits in the middle of our group. I'll then move that across and then do the same for our picture icon. So I'm going to choose to right click this and then center that vertically and then just move that across to the right hand side. And then finally, I'm going to stretch out the length of our group element here. And just like that, we finished adding in all of the elements to this group. What I would like to do though is create a workflow that runs whenever any of these elements within this group are clicked. And in that case, I'm going to redirect a user through to a page where they can submit a new Reddit post. And now the beauty of working with groups is that you can create a workflow trigger when the group element itself is clicked. And that will also factor in any element inside of that group. So whenever someone is to click, let's say, one of these icons or even the group within this, it's going to trigger this same workflow, which we'll be using to create a navigation event. So I'm going to click on my overall group here, and I'm going to choose to start edit a workflow whenever that is clicked. And within this, I'm going to choose from a navigation event and choose the go to page option. And in this instance, I'm going to want to create a new page within my application that allows a user to create a new Reddit post. And the fastest way to create a new page is by selecting from our destination drop down here and just scrolling down to the option where we can choose to create a new page. And I'll be calling this page submit. I'll then choose to create that. And from here, I can then easily just select that the destination page will be our new submit page. And we won't need to send any data through to this page for the time being. And now after we built out the group element on our page, the next element I would like to add is the homepage feed of posts that are displayed within subreddits. And in order to do this, we're going to need to leverage what's called a repeating group element. But before I add that into the page, I'm just going to double click on our page here and expand the height to be 1500 pixels, just so I've got some room to work with. Of course, when we preview our application or you publish it into production, you can always just change the height so it is adjusted accordingly. But for the time being, I'm just going to expand it down so I've got plenty of leeway to work with. And then from there, I'm going to choose to add in our repeating group element. I'm going to drag this out so it's roughly the same width as our group element on the page already. And if you haven't already had the chance to use a repeating group within Bubble, they're the perfect way to pull and display data that's stored within your database. So if you ever wanted to display a list of users, or in my case, a list of Reddit posts like a homepage feed, this is the exact element you'll need to use in order to bring that functionality to life. And before we can actually add in any elements to display our Reddit posts, we'll first need to configure the data source for our repeating group. So that way it knows which particular data to actually display. And so the first field we'll need to update is the type of content. So this is the type of thing we want to display in general. And in this case, it's going to be a post because we'll be displaying a list of Reddit posts. And then when it comes to the data source, this will allow us to determine which particular post we'll need to display. And so we're going to add in a data source here and choose to perform a search through our database for all of the Reddit posts that have been published in subreddits that the current user, so the person who's logged in, has actually chosen to join. So this is just going to be a list of relevant posts that have been published into the subreddits that they essentially follow. And in order to display that list of posts, we're going to add a constraint onto all the posts that are being displayed. And we're only going to display those posts where the original subreddit that they were posted into is within the current user, so the person who's logged in, their list of subreddits that they have joined. And now that will curate a nice feed for the user of only the posts that are relevant to their interests. And while we're here, I'm also just going to choose to sort these posts by their creation date and set the descending value to be yes, which just means that it's going to display the most recent posts at the top. So all of the content will be in reverse chronological order. And after I've configured my data source, I can choose to close that menu. I'm then going to update the layout style here to be extended vertical scrolling, which just means that although there's only 4 cells within my repeating group here, it's going to continually expand down based on how many posts are needed to display to this user, which means I can then also update the number of rows that are displayed to be 2, because as I just mentioned, these will continually expand down and display new entries. And now while I'm working with my repeating group, I personally just like to update the style of this so I can add a border onto it, just so I can see where the boundaries of the canvas are from my repeating group. So I've just gone ahead and removed the style there. And if I scroll on down to the border option, I'm just going to put a solid border on this repeating group for now, so I can see where it sits on my page. And from here, I can then choose to add in any of the dynamic elements I would like to display for each particular post. And the thing I love about repeating groups is that you only need to add in the elements to the top cell, and then they will automatically duplicate into every other row below it. And so the very first thing I'd like to add within my repeating group is an up and down arrow, which will later on be used to, of course, allow users to up and down vote particular Reddit posts. And so in order to add those in, I'm first going to choose to add in a group element into our repeating group here. Now I'm going to make this a bit of a narrow group that is vertically quite high. And I'm also just going to remove the style of this group just because I want to add a flat background color here. And I'm going to want this to be a shade of gray so it replicates the same real world experience as the Reddit product. And now within this group, I'm going to choose to add in 2 icons. There'll be an upvote icon and then a downvote icon. So if I head to my visual elements, I can choose to add in an icon here. I'll drag out our first icon. I'm just going to type in the word arrow here. And from here, I'm just going to choose the upwards arrow. I will then also remove the style of this icon just so I can update the color of it. And the color I'd like to update this to is just going to be a shade of gray. We'll go with this, which is 858585. And then from here, I'm just going to make sure that this arrow is centered horizontally. So I just right clicked on the actual icon, and then you can choose to center that horizontally within our group. And similar to the group above this, if I was to move this group around, you'll see that that icon will stay within it. I'll just move that back for now. Below our upvote icon though, I'm just going to add in a text element for the time being. And this will just display the word vote. I'm also just going to choose to bold the font here. So I'm going to open up my rich text editor, highlight this text and choose to bold the style of that. I will then choose to save that text. And I'm going to need to make this a little bit higher. So I could just theoretically drag this down. And there we go. I'll also make sure that is centered horizontally within my group. And then I'm going to make a copy of my upvote icon. Just drag this below. I will right click on that, center that horizontally within my group. And then I'm going to update the icon itself. I'm just going to type in the word arrow once again. Only this time I'm just going to be choosing from the downwards arrow there. And I might just move my text across a tad and up a bit there as well. And then I can just close off some of the empty space in my gray group. And later on throughout a separate module, I'll be breaking down how we can create an upvote and downvote feature within our Reddit posts. But for now, the next element I'd like to add within my repeating group is, first of all, the image of the subreddit that this post has been published within, followed by the name of that subreddit, and then the username of the person who has created that post. And so I'm going to start by adding in an image element. So if I grab an image, I'm going to drag this down. And now, similar to our user profile photo, whenever a subreddit is created, a user isn't actually required to add in a custom profile photo for it on the spot, which means that we'll have to create a default image for subreddits that's displayed until the moderator of that subreddit decides to go ahead and actually add in a custom image. And so similar to our user profile photo, I'm just going to upload a static image I have stored in my local files. And within my files, I just have a generic subreddit photo that I've created here. I'm just going to choose to upload that image. And while we're here, I'm also just going to need to add in a condition that allows us to change the data of this image if the moderator of the subreddit that this post was published within has actually taken the time to add in their own custom profile image. So I'm going to select our condition tab here. I'll define a new condition, and I'll recognize when the current cells post, so this is the post that we're working within our repeating group here, when the original subreddit that this post was published in, when its featured photo, which is the profile photo for that subreddit, when the value of that data field is not empty, which means that a subreddit moderator has taken the time to upload an image. I'd like to change the image source here and select to add in a dynamic image, and we'll be pulling the value of this image from our database. So then I'm going to want to display the current cells post, yet again, the original subreddit, the featured photo that has been uploaded. And like before, I'm also going to choose to process this with Imgix and tick this box here that allows me to resize the dimensions by cropping the image, just to make sure that whatever image the moderator for that subreddit has uploaded fits nicely within the dimensions that I've added here. Which, while we're talking about the dimensions, let's jump back into our appearance tab, and we're just going to edit the width and height of this image. I'm going to make it 40 pixels wide by 40 pixels high. I'm also going to scroll on down to the roundness of this and make it 100, so it's a perfect circle. And then I'll also just make sure it's in line with the group beside it there, which it is. And now beside the actual image of the subreddit, I'm going to display the name of the subreddit that this post was shared within. So I'm going to head to my visual elements tab, select to add in a text element. I'm going to drag this all the way across my repeating group cell here. And then I'm going to choose to insert dynamic data, and I'm going to display the current cells post that we're working within, the original subreddit that it was published inside of, the name of that subreddit, and then I'm also going to want to display the name of the user who has published this post. So I'm going to select on the line below this. I'm just going to add in a couple of spaces there, just so there's some space between the first bit of dynamic data and this next bit that I'm going to add in. I might even add one more for good measure, and then I'm going to want to display the username of the person who created this post. So I'll be inserting dynamic data, and I'll display the current cells post, the creator of that post. So that is the user who has in fact published this post. So I'll select the creator, and then this will reference all of the data fields under our user data type. So I'm going to display the username of this person, and then that will validate. While we're here, I'm also just going to open up our rich text editor and just highlight our first piece of dynamic data here, which is the subreddit name, just because I'd like to easily separate between what these two dynamic text fields are. I'm just going to highlight the subreddit's name and choose to bold the formatting of that. I'm also just going to contradict myself and just remove one of these spaces between these two text fields. I'll then choose to save the formatting of that, and you'll see it will update accordingly within our repeating group. I'll then also just close the height of that element and move it down so it's roughly in line with the center of our subreddit image. And now below this text, we're going to add in another text element, which is the actual title of the Reddit post itself. So we're going to head to our visual elements here, grab a text element, and we're going to add this in from the left-hand side of our subreddit image there. We're going to drag that out, and as I mentioned, we want this to be the title that's been stored within this post in our repeating group. So we're going to choose to insert dynamic data, and I'm going to want to display the current cells post, the title of that post. It's nice and simple, but while we're here, I'm also just going to update the style of this just to be the H2 dark style heading, just because this is a pretty prominent field when you're searching through any posts on Reddit itself. And now below this is where things can get a little bit more tricky. So I definitely recommend paying a little bit more attention for these next few elements I'm going to add in. So within our MVP today, users are going to have the ability to post either text-based Reddit posts or image-based posts. And now depending on which type of post a user creates, will determine which particular data I'll need to display within this repeating group. So if a user posts a text post, I'm just going to want to add in a text field that displays, let's say, the first 200 characters of that post. But if a user publishes a image-based post, I'm not going to want to display any text. Instead, I'm just going to be displaying an image. And now this is where we can start to use group elements to either hide and display groups based on certain conditions. And I'm going to be explaining this in as much detail as I possibly can. But before we do that, we're going to need to expand the height of our repeating group down quite a bit, just so we have a bit of working space here. So I'm going to drag that down at my page there. And of course, we can drag that back up if we no longer need any empty space by the end of this. But first, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add in a group element to our repeating group. And within that, I'm going to add a text field. And I'm going to create a condition on that group that allows it to only display if this post within our repeating group is in fact a text-based post. And if that post is an image post, not a text post, I'm going to want to hide that text-based group, and I'll be adding in another group which will store an image in it, and we'll want to display that. And so I'm going to start by adding in a group element as I mentioned. So if I head to my containers menu here, I will add in a group. I actually won't need this to be very high. And I'm going to update the style of my group here. You can just choose any option here. I'm just going to say group tips, and this will make it a light shade of green. And the only reason I'm doing that is because I'm going to remove the style of that when we actually preview or publish our application. I'm just going to use colors at the moment so I can easily differentiate between the two groups that I'm going to add. But for our group here, I'm going to update the name of this to be called group text post. And then I'm going to add in a text element into this group. So I'll be storing it inside there. I'm going to drag this all the way out. And in order to display the text of the repeating group cell that this group sits within, I'm going to need to update the type of content that we store within this group. So if I click on the main group here, the green group itself, I'm going to update the type of content here to be a Reddit post, just so that way I can store the information of the repeating group cell that this group sits within. So essentially, I'm just going to be passing the data of the repeating group post onto this group, and then I can later reference the text element here to display the post that's stored within our green group. So for the data source of this group here, I'm just going to have this be the current cell's post. So the current cell is, of course, our repeating group cell there. And then once I've added in the data source for this group, I can select the text element here, and I can choose to insert dynamic data, and I can call upon the post content we have stored for the post that's within our repeating group, which of course is now being displayed within our group itself. And so if I was to perform a search in our database for the post content, now if you remember when we had configured our database, the post content was a separate data type to our post, just because we didn't want to store all of that data on the one post, because if we were loading 100 posts within our repeating group, it's going to slow it down quite quickly. So instead, what I want to do is reference the post content where the original post that the content belongs to. And I'll be showing you how we can link these together in a later module when we actually create a new Reddit post. But when the original post equals the same value as the parent group's post, so the parent group is our green group here, which of course is storing the value of our repeating group cell. When its value equals the same post as the original post, I'm going to select from the first item option here. So because there's only going to be one post content in our database where the original post is the current cell's post, we can just reference the first and only item stored in our database. And then from here, I'm going to want to reference the post text. So this is the actual text that is referenced for that post. And now I know this can seem quite confusing, particularly if you are relatively new to Bubble. But one thing I just want to say is that if you take the time to build out the infrastructure for your application properly now, it's going to give you significant gains in the future as your application starts to scale. And if you don't take the time to do this now, you'll quickly find that your application might slow down as you onboard new users and they create more content. But for now, that's all we'll need to configure for this dynamic text element. I'm just going to reduce the height of the text itself, as well as the height of the group that it sits within there. And now we'll just need to create a condition onto this group that either hides or displays it based on the type of Reddit post that has been published. So if it's a text-based post, I want this group to be displayed. If it's an image-based post, I want that group to be hidden. So I'm going to, first of all, unselect this option here that makes this element visible on page load. So at this point in time, it's going to be invisible regardless, which means I'm going to then need to create a condition that recognizes when this group should be displayed. And the way I can recognize that is by identifying if the post content that has been published for this Reddit post, if the text of that is not empty, meaning that the user has in fact added some text into that post, I would want this to be displayed. So I'm going to choose to define a new condition, and similar to the data source for our text element there, I'm going to choose to perform a search in our database for all of the post content OG post field when it equals the same value as the current sales post that it sits within inside of our repeating group. So I'm going to select the current sales post option. And because there's only going to be one post content in our database that's linked to this one original post, there's only going to be one instance of that, as I just mentioned. So we're going to select the first and only instance of this. And when within this post content, when its text field is not empty, which just means that a user has in fact selected that this is a text-based post and they've saved some data of text within it, I'm going to select that this element should be visible and tick that that is true. So that now means that if this post is a text-based post, this group here will display, as well as the text that sits within it. And now after we've configured this condition, we're going to add another group below this that will allow us to display an image if this post was registered as an image-based post. But before I do that, there's one last configuration I want to make for this group element here, and that is within our appearance tab. So the thing I'm going to want to change is that I'm going to select this option here to collapse this element's height when it's hidden. And what that means is that if we have another group below this that will store an image, and if we'd like to actually display that group because it's an image-based post, we're going to obviously want to hide this text-based group here, but I'm also going to want to collapse the height of it, which just means that any content below it will move up and take its place. So that just ensures that there's no empty space here where this element would traditionally sit. And once we've configured that setting, we can go ahead and start adding in the group we'll need in order to display an image for an image-based post. So if we scroll on down to our containers menu here, I'm going to add in yet another group. I'll make this relatively high, but also roughly the same width as the text-based group above it there. I'm also just going to update the style here. I'm going to choose just another default style that Bubble has, just because we can, of course, obviously remove the style once we preview our application. And for this group, I'm going to start by giving this a name called group post image, because as I mentioned, this is where we're going to be displaying an image within a post. And like before, the first thing we'll need to do is update the type of content that's displayed within this group. Of course, we'll be selecting from a post similar to our green text-based group there. And then for the data source, we'll just want this to be the current cell's post. So the post of the repeating group cell that it sits within. And now from here, we're going to add in an image element into this group itself. So this is where we'll be displaying the image of the post. I'm going to drag this all the way out there. And now in order to display the image itself, we're going to need to insert some dynamic data here. So I'm going to choose to insert that data, and similar to our text-based element, we're going to perform a search in our database for the post content where the original post equals the same value as the parent group's post. So that is the red group that this image element sits within. And of course, because there's only one post content that belongs to the parent group's post in our database, we're going to once again select from the very first item. Only in this case, I'm going to want to display the post image data field. And similar to when I previously added some images onto my page, I'm also going to choose the process with imgix option just so I can select to fit the dimensions by cropping it, which just means that it's going to stretch the dimensions of the image out to fit quite nicely within this space. And now that I've finished configuring the actual image itself, I can add the condition onto my red group here to only allow it to be displayed when the post itself has registered an image, not a text-based post. And so the first thing I'll need to do under my red group is, of course, unselect that this element is visible on page load. And of course, similar to our green group, I'm also going to select the option to collapse this element's height when it's hidden, just so that way if the post itself is a text-based post, it's going to remove the height of this red group element, which just means the repeating group itself will collapse, so there's not this big empty gap at the bottom of it. And then from here, what we can do is just register the condition that would allow this group to actually be displayed on our page. So I'm going to define a new condition, and I'm going to perform a search in my database once again for some post content where the original post equals the same value as the current cell's post. And so the current cell's post is of course the cell within our repeating group. And when the very first and only item in our database, when its image field is not empty, meaning that the user has in fact uploaded an image to this entry in our database, I'm going to select that this element is visible and tick that that should be true. And now we're going to have an experience that allows us to alternate between the two groups that should be displayed at any given time. And of course, when one group is not being displayed, it will collapse and the other will take its place. And that is the very last feature I'd like to add within our repeating group here. While we're building out our homepage though, there's just two minor features I'd also like to add that we can quickly work our way through. And the first is that I'd like to display a list of all of the potential subreddits that could be recommended to a user. So if you've ever used Reddit before, you'll of course know that on the right hand side of the homepage, there's just a list of 5 subreddits that a user has not yet joined. And it just recommends the user to click through and view the content within those subreddits, or just join the subreddit itself. And that's an experience we can easily create using a repeating group element. And so in order to add that into our page here, the first thing I'm going to do is add in just another group element that I'll be storing my repeating group inside of. And once I've added the group onto my page here, I'm going to just remove the style of this, update the background style to be a flat color. It'll now be a white color by default, which I'm happy to leave it as. And I'm also just going to update the roundness to be 5, just so the borders of this group match the same curvature as the previous group and input field on my page. And within this group, the very first element I'd like to add is just a text heading at the top of this. And this text heading is just going to display the words join, communities, and I'd like to open up our rich text editor, highlight this text and choose to bold the formatting of it. I'll then choose to save that, and then I can reduce the height and width of this element itself. And then below this text element, I'm going to add in a repeating group that will display a list of subreddits. So I'm going to head to my containers menu, add in a repeating group. I'm going to drag this down the full height of our group there. And then for the type of content I'd like to display within this repeating group, it's going to of course be a subreddit, because I'd like to display a list of subreddits. And now for the data source, I'm going to perform a search in my database for all of the subreddits. But what I'm also going to want to do is take the time to create a filter on this that only allows subreddits to be displayed if the user has not yet joined that community. Because it'd be quite pointless if I was to recommend a subreddit to a user that they've already joined. And the way we'll be adding that filter is not through our constraints here. Instead, we're going to need to use what's called an advanced filter. And so in order to create that, we're going to select the more option here, and we're going to type in the word filtered, which just essentially means that from all of the subreddits that have been searched in our database, we're going to filter and refine our results even more. And now the reason we're using the filtered option is because it provides us with some advanced features. And now more often than not, you won't actually need to use these. But under these circumstances today, I'll be explaining why we're going to be using the advanced features in a moment. So I'm going to add a constraint on my filter here, and I'm going to type in the word advanced. And now this is going to unlock those advanced features I was talking about. And this is where things might get a little confusing, so I'm going to try to explain everything in as much detail as I possibly can. So essentially, from all of these subreddits that we're searching through, I want to remove from that list any subreddits that the current user has already joined. And now, if you remember, in our database, under our user data type, we have a data field here called joined subreddits. And now this is a list of subreddits. And now the way Bubble's going to store that data within our database is by identifying the unique ID of every single subreddit that the user has joined. And then it's going to compile those into a list. And the reason I mention this is because we're going to essentially exclude the unique IDs of any subreddits that are in the user's joined list. So from our advanced option here, I'm going to identify this subreddit. So from all of the subreddits we're searching, if a single subreddit, I'm going to type in the word ID, if its unique ID, and then I'm going to scroll on down and we'll see an option called is not in. So if this subreddit's unique ID is not in the current user's joined subreddits list, and I want to select the each option's unique ID choice. So I'm going to scroll on down and we'll see the each option's unique ID. So this essentially just means that if the unique ID of this subreddit is not already in the current user's list of unique IDs for the subreddits that they've joined, it will then allow it to be displayed within our repeating group here. And now I know that if you're a first-time Bubble user, that can seem a little bit more confusing. And as I mentioned, it is a bit more of an advanced feature for those who are familiar with using filters and constraints on searches. But if you'd just like to understand that again, I'd recommend just taking the time to pause the tutorial and rewind that until you can completely understand the structure of this filter itself. But now that we've finished configuring the data source for this repeating group, we can update the layout style of this. And in this case, I want this to just be what's called a fixed number of cells. So unlike our homepage repeating group here, where we're displaying a list of posts, I don't want this repeating group to continually scroll down and display all of the communities within our database. Instead, I only want it to display 5 subreddits in my database at one given time. And in fact, if we'd even like to display a list of these subreddits in any random order, we can open up our search here, and under the sort by option, we can choose the random sorting option. And now that's just going to change the list of subreddits that are recommended to a user every single time they load this page. I'm going to close that. And as I mentioned, I want this to display a list of 5 subreddits at a time. So I'm going to update the number of rows here to be 5, and it will update that accordingly. And then while I'm working on this repeating group, I'm just going to remove the style of it, just so I can add in a border for the time being. And that just allows me to see where it actually sits within my group itself. And then finally, I'm going to add in the data I'd like to display within each repeating group cell. And that's just going to be the photo of the subreddit followed by the name of the subreddit itself. And in order to streamline that process, I'm going to head over to my subreddit photo here, and I'm going to choose to copy that. I'm then going to select into my repeating group, and I'm going to paste that in. And of course, like any repeating group, it's going to populate the rest of my cells. I'll just move that across. And the reason I've copied this across is because if you remember, we had created a condition on this image. So by default, a subreddit may not have a custom image for that community. So we're going to just provide the value of the static image that we have uploaded. But then from there, we're just going to need to define a new condition. So the condition we've copied across is no longer valid. So I'm just going to remove that condition and recreate this. So I'm going to identify if the current cell subreddit, if its featured photo is not empty, meaning that if the moderator of this community has in fact uploaded a custom image, I'm going to update the image source of this. I will insert dynamic data, and I would like to display that image that they have uploaded. So I'll be displaying the current cell subreddit, its featured photo, and I'm going to process that with ImgX like always, and select the option to resize the dimensions by cropping them.
And then beside this, I'm going to display a text element that will just display the name of this subreddit. So under our visual elements, I'm going to grab a text element. I will drag that across. And then in this text element, I'm going to insert dynamic data, and I'll display the current cell subreddit, its name. And while I'm here, I'd also like to open up our rich text editor, because I'm going to highlight the text here and choose to bold the formatting of it. And then I'm going to move this text element down on my page so it's roughly in the center of my repeating group. And then I can expand the width of that out and close off any empty space at the bottom of my repeating group there. And perfect. And from here, we can even close off the empty space in our group if we would like, as well as maybe some of the space on the width there. And if I really wanted, I could move the repeating group just to the left a tad as well. And let's say if a user has discovered a community, or a subreddit I should say, within this featured list here, and they'd like to click through and view the content within that subreddit, we can easily create that experience using a navigation event within a workflow. So we're going to click on the text element here within our repeating group, and we're going to choose to start edit a workflow every single time this text element is clicked. And within this workflow, I'm going to choose from a navigation event because I'd like to redirect the user to a page that's going to be dedicated to displaying the information of each subreddit. So I'm going to choose the go to page option. And at this point, the page does not yet exist. So we're going to need to create that page itself. And so in order to do that, I'm going to actually head to my page drop-down menu here and choose to add in a new page. And I'll be calling this page R, which if you've ever used Reddit itself, the URL string for a subreddit's page begins with the letter R, followed by the actual unique ID of that subreddit itself. Of course, if you'd like to call this a different title like subreddit or community, you can absolutely change the name of that to whatever you'd like. But I'm just going to call mine R for now, so I'm going to choose to create that. And now while I'm on this page, I'm going to need to make one minor change, and that is that I'm going to need to identify a type of content that I would like to display on this page. So if I'm sending a user through to our subreddit page, I'd obviously like to send through some data with it so our page knows which particular subreddit to display on this page. And the way I can do that is by updating the type of content that we'll be displaying on this page to be a subreddit. And then if I'm to jump back into my home page, open up our workflow tab and open the workflow we were just creating where the text is clicked. If I was to select our navigation event here, I can then choose that the destination page will be our subreddit page, so the R page. And then the data I would like to send through to it is the current cell subreddit. So that is the subreddit that a user will click within our repeating group. And before we wrap up this module, there's one last thing I'd like to add on to our homepage here, and that is just another group element that allows a user to create their own subreddit. And we won't be building out the workflow for that yet, but I'm just going to add this on the page so it streamlines the next module within our series here. And so of course I'm going to add in yet another group onto my page. I'm going to make this roughly the same width as the group above it there. I'll also remove the style of this, update the background color to be a flat color, which will be white, and then also update the roundness of this to be 5 so it matches the group above it. And within this group, I'm just going to add two simple buttons into this. The first will prompt a user to create a post, and then the second will prompt a user to create a subreddit. So if I head to my visual elements, I'm going to add in a button element here, and this button will display the words create a post. If I'd like, I could also right click on this button and center this horizontally within my group. And then finally, I'm just going to make a copy of this button here, drag it down, and I would like this button to display the words create a community. So I'm just going to update the text there. But for our second button here, I'm just going to update the style of the button so it is the opposite color of the existing button above it. That'll just allow a user to easily differentiate between the two. So I'm going to update the style here and choose that this should be the secondary button color. And then we're going to need to make some quick changes to the style of this button here. So I'm going to edit the style. And for the color of this button, I would like this to actually be white. And when it comes to the color of the font within this button, I'm going to paste in the same color code as the blue that is used throughout the button above it on our page. So if you wanted that color code, it's 0079D3. I'm also going to add in a solid border and make the color of this the same as the blue color code there. And then finally, I'll update the roundness of the border to be 20. And then if I jump back into my design tab, you'll see that that has been updated. I can then close off the unused height within this group. And that actually concludes everything I'd like to add onto my homepage for the time being. At this point in our tutorial, there's not a whole lot of functionality on our homepage right now, just because we haven't built out the workflows to actually create a post, which of course means that there won't be any content visible within our repeating group here. But once we've started building out some of those features, we can come back and take a preview at what this whole homepage experience looks like. If I was to jump back into my Notion doc though, I'm just going to check off that we've finished building out all of the features within our homepage. And I know that this was quite a long module, but it was definitely essential to get some of the main groundwork out of the way in order to streamline the rest of our build throughout our Reddit clone.
And that is all I have time for in this tutorial today. If you were interested in checking out the rest of the course, I'd recommend clicking the link in the description to purchase the full course. Within the complete course, I'll be walking you through the step-by-step instructions to complete the rest of our build. You can also get access to a suite of Bubble tutorials where you'll learn how to build other popular products. If you'd like to get started building some other popular products for free, I'll be sure to include some suggested links at the end of this video. Thanks again for taking the time to watch, and be sure to hit that subscribe button if you'd like to see any other useful tutorials to help you on your Bubble journey.